So today's subject and topic is the halacha of yesh bishul achat tzli or tzli achat bishul, and yes, it's like Reb Shloim said, it's a mistayef and an anaf of the idea of yesh bishul achat bishul or ein bishul achat bishul. So I'm assuming you learned the Gemara in Psachim, Daf Mem Aleph. And I'm just going to review the Gemara once more for those who either didn't learn it or it's never a chesoron to have a chazorah. So the Gemara in Psachim brings a brisa that says, Bishlu va'achar kach tzoloi. If somebody was mevashel the korban Pesach and afterwards he was soilea, he roasted the korban Pesach, we all know that the korban Pesach needed to be soli, it had to be roasted. Mevushel dige korban Pesach is possible. One is not yoytze the mitzvah with eating a korban Pesach that's mevushel. If a person was soiled the korban Pesach, he first was mevashel the korban Pesach, and afterwards he did sli, he roasted it, or oishet soloi, he first roasted it, va'achkach bishloi, and then he cooked it. So the halacha is, says the Gemara, chayiv. You get a lav and you get malchus in both of these situations. So the Gemara asks, Bishloma, Bishloi v'achakach tzoloi, if you first cooked it and then you roasted it. So I understand why you chayiv. Chayiv, you know why? Do Bishloi, because he cooked it. That means once he cooked it, it's considered cooked. And therefore, you're eating a cooked korban Pesach. But if he first roasted and then he did a bishul and then he cooked it, what's the problem? It's roasted. So why should this not be a kosher korban Pesach? So the Gemara says, Omar Rav Kahana, Homani Reb Yosi. This is Reb Yosi, the Tanya, the Brisa says, Yoitzen beroke kashoru ubemevushel, shaloi nimuach, divrei Rabbi Meir. One is Yoitze, the mitzvah of achilas matzah, b'leil Pesach, with a rokik, a matzah that's shorui, that's either soaked in hot water in a kli rishon, or b'mevushel, that's actually cooked. So long as it was not nimuach, it didn't totally disintegrate. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yosi says no. Yoitzen beroka kasharui. It's true, it could be sharui. Avaloi b'mevushel. Afal pishalei nimuach. So the Gemara tells us that again we have a machloikes Reb Meir and Reb Yosi. Reb Meir says that if you have a matzah that's cooked, that means, what was a matzah? A matzah is made first in the oven. It's first ofui, it's first baked, and then you cook it. So if you bake a matzah and then you cook it in water, the halacha is that this matzah, according to Reb Meir, is kosher, so long as it wasn't nimuach. Rabbi Yosi says no. Once you cook it, even though it was baked originally, the matzah is no longer kosher. So the Gemara says that this is the same idea as if you have a korban Pesach and you first artzoilea it, you first roast it, and now you cook it. So the tzlia, the first tzlia is like the baking of the matzah. So you have a baked matzah and a roasted korban Pesach, and now you go and you cook the korban Pesach, or you cook the matzah. So according to Reb Meir, we still look at it as its original form, which is it's still considered roasted and baked. And according to Rabbi Yossi, we now look at it as something that's cooked and not roasted and not baked. So therefore, by Korban Pesach, you would get malchus because you're eating a mavushal digger Korban Pesach, according to Rabbi Yossi. And you would also not be yoitze matzah because you're not eating any more a matzah, you're eating a cooked matzah, and a cooked matzah is not a matzah. And that the Gemara is doiche, ula ama, afilu teimer Meir. You can even say that by Korban Pesach, it works with Reb Meir, and still you're chayiv because there's a special pasuk. It says, "Uboshel mevushel mikol mokum." That means that there's a special halacha by Korban Pesach that as long as it's mevushel in any fashion, even after it was nitzla, it's still no good. Even though by a matzah, Reb Meir holds it remains a matzah even if it's cooked. So the simple understanding before we get any deeper is the Gemara is telling us that if a person wants to know what's the halacha, barring a pasuk of uvashel mevushel, which is a special gzeres hakosef by Hilchos Korban Pesach, one would want to know if something was first cooked, first baked, or first roasted, and now you cook it. According to Reb Meir, it remains its original status. It's either considered roasted or baked. According to the Rabbi Yossi, it changes its status. From now on, it's called mevushel. So this is the simple aleph base that says in this Gemara. And now I would like to pose what we call a chakira, a yeshivish chakira. We're going to ask a question to try to understand what's the understanding of this Gemara. So there's two possible explanations, I think, how to look at this machloikis Reb Meir and Rabbi Yossi. One possible way to understand it is that there's no question if somebody takes something that's either baked or roasted and he cooks it now, it's going to cause a change in its taste, in its texture. There's going to be a change here. That's not a question. The question that the Meir and Rabbi Yossi are arguing with is how extreme is the change that's happening here in changing the status of the thing. That means it was before something that's roasted. Does the cooking do such a good job in changing the texture of what it was before that it no longer is deemed by us something that's roasted or baked? It now is considered something that's cooked because it changed so much that we don't look at it anymore as it's something that's roasted and baked. Because there was such an extreme change in the texture and the taste of the thing. That's what Rabbi Yossi holds. And Rabbi Meir says, it's true, there's a change, but it's not enough extreme for it to change and to be considered as if it wasn't roasted. There'll be some of the roasting and it'll be Bishul. So you still consider it roasted, but as well, there's some added texture or change with the fact that it got cooked. But it's not considered as if you got rid of whatever was here before and you now have an item that's just cooked because there was such an extreme change. So we have a machloikis. How do we look at this? How much change do we need in order for us to say it's as if what happened before is gone? And now we just look at it in its new stage, which is the texture and the taste of a cooked thing and not of a roasted and a baked. That's one way for us to look at this. There's another possibility, and that is let's assume for a second that it's a change. And one will admit that there's a change here, but it's still not going to be considered, according to Reb Meir, something that we're going to look at that it's cooked. And the reason is because cooking by definition means that you took an item that was raw and you cooked it. But something that wasn't raw, it's already roasted and baked. So even though you made changes to it, and you made changes in the taste and the texture, it's not an act of cooking, because cooking means taking raw material and making it cooked. Taking cooked material or taking baked material is simply taking something that's already not raw and adding taste or changes to it. That is not deemed a cooked item. It's considered a baked item with enhanced changes through cooking. But it's not considered a cooked item, because to cook something, you need to take a raw material and cook it. And therefore, Reb Meir says, this is not cooked. We don't look at it as cooked. Rabbi Yossi says, no. This item is not, it was roasted, but it never was cooked. Roasting and cooking are two different forms of taking a raw item and turning it into something that's either considered, if it was raw and it wasn't edible, he made it edible. So there's two ways to make it edible, or it's two ways to treat a raw material and give it two different flavors through using heat. So we look at the thing and we say, true, you made it edible through the form. You took the raw material, you gave it the changes that fire could make through roasting or baking. And now there's another way. And there's a way called Bishul. And Legabe Bishul, the Afia and the tzli is commandalized. We don't care that you did it before. You now use the new form of changing this item. And these two forms are not serious, they're different. And therefore you have form number one, which is called tzli, and you have form number two, which is called Bishul. And yes, it can be deemed a Bishul, even though it already had a tzli. But both agree that changes were made, enough changes that this would be considered a change. But the change would not give it a shame that it's mevushal. It's not considered good, because cooking needs taking a raw material, according to the Meir, and cooking it. But if it's already cooked, you can't, if it's already baked, you can't deem it cooking. You could call it changes, but you can't call it cooking. And according to Rabbi Yossi, it would be considered cooked. Now, it sounds very theoretical, and I'm going to do a little bit, we're going to go a little bit through the Indian, and we'll see how it seems that different Achronim, or maybe Rishonim, understood this question differently, understood one of these two sides, and we'll see how they view the sugya and came out with different things accordingly. So, you already learned, whoever was here by the Achonashir learned that the Yereim, Rabbi Loza Mimitz, in his Sefer Yereim, brings this Gemara, and according to this Gemara, is Machadish HaHalacha. And that is, we know that the halacha is in Hilchos Shabbos, Ein Bishul Acha Bishul, which means that once an item was cooked, it can't be cooked again. There's no Isser Bishul to cook something that's already cooked. Now, there's no question that you can have a Heichet Timtzah, that you're mevashel something, and the second Bishul makes a change. Like the Rishonim speak out, if somebody has a cholent Friday night, and the beans are all cooked, you can eat the cholent, it tastes good, but it's clear that the cholent Shabbos in the morning is an andere cholent. It's what we call mitztamik v'yofeloi. It got more dried out. It solidified. Instead of being a bean soup, it became not it became a tafshel, became a a chont, like it is Shabbos in the morning. Now, that's clear that we hold that ein bishul achar bishul, once the food is completely cooked and it's edible to everybody, that you make it and enhance it through fire is not called bishul. And one is not oive hilchos bishul b'Shabbos by doing so. Ein bishul achar bishul. And therefore, barring Issa de Rabbanon, if one were to take chont Friday night out of the pot and return the pot back to its place without the problem, the Rabbanon of Chazorah, which needs to be addressed, one would not be over Hilchos Bishul because it's already considered cooked. And if it's cooked, it can continue cooking and become better. That's not Bishul. Says Rabbi Loza Mamitz that if I have something that's roasted or baked, and now I would like to cook it, meaning cooking means you do it in water, in a liquid. It's not directly baked or roasted from the fire. Roasting is usually done, if you're roasting and baking it, is direct heat, directly from the fire that's changing the material, that's changing the thing you're baking or cooking or roasting. But cooking is in a liquid, and the liquid, the heat of the liquid is what cooks the item. So the halacha is that if you're going to cook after something that's already baked or something that's already roasted, the halacha is yesh bishul achar tzli. How do I know that? Says the Rirayim, I know that from the halacha of this Gemara. It says in this Gemara, according to Rabbi Yossi, and we paskin like Rabbi Yossi, that if someone takes a matzah and he cooks it, it's no longer a matzah, because yesh bishul achar afia. So says the Rirayim that this is as well important for Hilchos Shabbos, that one can cook, it cooks after something's already baked. It's considered cooking. It's not considered an enhancement in the taste of what was there before, which was that there was a baked item, and now you made it, you added an additional benefit, like if someone was cooking something and he was mitztamik v'yofaloi. No, it's a new form of cooking. It's a new form that was never here, and this new form would be deemed a meleches bishul for Shabbos. And his raya is from this Gemara. So, just for a moment to think about this. The Gemara's discussion was not a Isser Melocha. It was, we have a matzah, we have something that's considered a baked item. We cook it, and the question is this item still considered a baked item, or it's now considered a cooked item? A cooked dough is at least not a matzah that you could be yoytze the mitzvah with, and a baked dough is something that can be yoytze the matzah. So we look at this as a cooked dough. So the Yereim says that if that's true, it's also negate the Hilchos Shabbos, where the question is not whether it's a cooked food or a baked food. The question is whether it's considered a new meleches bishul, it's considered an enhancement of what was before, or it's considered a whole new form of cooking, and therefore it's a melacha, because this melacha, this ma'aseh bishul, was never done before. It's a new, you took an item and you cooked it. That it was baked before, okay, it was baked, and now you're cooking it. It's a whole new thing, and therefore it's a melacha. Now, personally, if someone would ask me this question, I could say maybe the two things are not tied. Because if we understood the Gemara like the first explanation that I said before, that it's just a question of what change, how extreme does the change have to be in order for one to still look at it as its original form of a baked thing, or if you cook it and you change the texture and you change the taste, then it's no longer deemed a baked thing. It may be that for Hilchos matzah, that's a problem. But when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos, maybe it's not considered a Melachas Bishul, because maybe Melachas Bishul means only when you took a raw material and you cooked it. If you didn't take a raw material and it was already used heat in order to enhance it, and now you're using heat in a new way, even though it changes the form of enhancement, who said that's Melachas Bishul? But the Yereim understands that these two things are attached. It would seem that he understands more like my second explanation, which is that if when one has an item that's cooked, the Gemara is saying that if you have an item that's roasted or baked, if you now cook it, since it never had this enhancement of cooking, it was never used, the form of heating was never, that was used before, was not a cooking form. This new form is deemed a whole new action, and therefore the new thing is called mevushal. And therefore, in Hilchos Shabbos, it would also be a problem because he is cooking a item on Shabbos, and that it was roasted before is not relevant because it's a new form called cooking. So this is the sheet of the Yereim. The Ravya argues with the Yereim, and he says that the Yereim, he doesn't understand the Yereim. He seemed to have forgotten a Gemara Masechta Brachos. The Gemara Masechta Brachos says, a machloik is between different Amoraim, whether a vegetable that was cooked is the halacha that you make a shahakol or you make a dom. That means someone takes a potato and he cooks it. Or let's better use an example. He takes a carrot and he cooks it. So if he eats that carrot raw, you make a dom. If you cook it, a machloik is amiroim. One Amor says you make a dom. The other Amor says you make a shahakol. So the Gemara says, I think it's a machlokes tanoim. Who's the machlokes tanoim? Back to our Reb Meir and Reb Yossi. According to the Reb Meir, if you take a matzah and you cook it, it's still a good matzah. According to Reb Yossi, it's no longer considered a matzah. So the Gemara seems to understand that the same line of reasoning would apply to a vegetable. You take a vegetable and you cook it. According to the Reb Meir, it remains a vegetable because it remains with its first status. Just like when you bake something and then you cook it, it remains its first status, which is that it's baked and not cooked. So too, if you cook a vegetable, it remains with its first status, which is that it's a vegetable. And according to Rabbi Yossi, if you took a matzah and you cook it, it's no longer a matzah, it's no longer a baked item, it's a whole new item. So if you take a yerek, a vegetable, and you cook it, it's no longer a vegetable. It was a vegetable, comes from a vegetable, but this new item is not a vegetable anymore. It's a new thing. And since it's a new thing, the bracha is not adoma, the bracha is shahakol. That's the Gemara's question. And the Gemara says, nah, even according to Rabbi Yossi, you would still make adoma. Why is it that a matzah you make adoma? Why is it a matzah that you're not yoytze? Tam matzah be'inon v'leker. You need the taste of matzah, and you don't have the taste of matzah. So the Ravya understand that the Gemara is saying that it's a very unique problem in Hilchos Matzah. And that is that Hilchos Matzah needs a matzah. It needs a taste of a matzah. And especially if you understand, like Tosfos, a matzah that's cooked is a halacha that it's not anymore the taste of matzah. It's like matzah ashira. The pasuk says lechem oini. It needs to be taste lechem oini, and it can't have an additional taste. It means it can't have a taste outside of bread, simple bread. And simple bread is not cooked. So once it has a cooked taste, it's no longer lechem oini, and therefore you're not eating bread, something that has the taste of bread. And memela, for matzah, it's no good. But any place else that it has nothing to do with taste, it has to do with status. Did this thing become a different status? then the halacha remains that it does not change its status even according to Rabbi Yossi. And therefore, the Rav Yah holds, Bepashtus, like Tosfos holds in Pesachim Daf Mem Aleph, that the Gemara in Brachos is arguing on the Gemara in Pesachim. And that is that the Gemara in Pesachim said that a korban Pesach, that you roast and then you cook, according to Rabbi Yossi, would not be kosher, without the pasuk of Bishul Mevushal. And the Gemara is now saying that's not true. If you roast a korban Pesach and then you cook it without the pasuk of Bishul Mevushal, it would be a kosher korban Pesach. Because there's no halacha by Pesach that it has to have tam Pesach, tam tzli. There's no such halacha. And therefore, it would be a good korban Pesach. But in Hilchos, and therefore a yerek and a matz and a korban Pesach would all be, everything would stay before. There's a special halacha about matzah that you need the taste of matzah and it's no longer here. Accordingly, says the Rav Yah, that it's a dover poshet and it comes to Hilchos Shabbos. You want to know if yesh bishul achatzli, if it's considered a bishul. The answer is definitely not. It's not considered bishul because it's already tzli. Just like the Gemara says that it doesn't become a korban Pesach, that's considered mevushal. It's considered a korban Pesach, that's tzli. But Rabbi Yossi only said about matzah because tam matzah be. And therefore, says the Rav Yah, I don't understand what the HaRav is talking about. The Gemara is mafurish. The Beis Yosef tells us that this kasha of the Rav Yah is such a strong kasha that he doesn't really know an answer to it. He says that the Rav Yah must be right because we paskin that a yerek shebishloi you make adama. So you have to answer like the Gemara says, and we paskin like Rabbi Yossi. So we have no choice but to say, like the Gemara says, tam matzah b'inam. So if that's true, so he has to be right, Rav Yah. So if that has to be right, because we paskin like the sugya of brachas, not like the sugya of psachim, he can't understand what the Rav Yah, what the HaRav is talking about. So the Taz comes, and we're not going to have time to go through the entire Taz, but the Taz basically says this, that when the Gemara says tam matzah be'inon, he does not mean that it's a unique halacha to Hilchos matzah. He agrees, the Gemara, when it says tam matzah be'inon, that same reasoning applies to a korban Pesach. It can also say tam Pesach be'inon v'leka. And that means if a korban Pesach would be roasted and then cooked, according to Rabbi Yossi, that would be chayiv without the pasuk of Bishul Mevushal, because it's cooked. It's not anymore roasted. Because tam Pesach be'inon. And the same thing would apply to Hilchos Shabbos. It's tam mevushal. It's a special halacha b'yerek that it makes no difference what taste it has, because a taste doesn't make anything a changed status. So basically, the Taz is telling us like this: when it comes to a yerek, the only way to make no bracha of adama is if you took it and you changed it. It's no longer a yerek. And that the Gemara is saying it's not true. It's still a yerek. So now you want to know why Rabbi Yossi says it's not considered a matzah? Because by matzah, you need the taste in order to decide what it is. That means the taste of tzli makes something tzli. The taste of bishul defines that it's cooked. And therefore, if it has the taste of a matzah, of bread, that's considered baked. Now that you cooked it and has the taste of something that's cooked, it's considered cooked. And if it's considered cooked, it's not bread, or it's at least not lechem oini. If you have a korban Pesach and it has to be tzli, if it doesn't have a taste of tzli, it now has a taste of something that's cooked, it's considered cooked. In Hilchos Shabbos, if you have something that was roasted or baked and now it has a taste of something that's cooked, it's considered cooked. So that means, I think it's very clear that the Taz understands that the question is not that this item got a new kind of form of cooking. Let's go back to our Hakira that we discussed before. There's two possible explanations to say why one could be over. Tzli, Bishul Achatzli, the Yereim. Why should one be over? One can explain the reason why you're over is because the first action you took was Bishul, was Tzli. Fine, it was one form of cooking. He did a different form of cooking. These two forms are not the same. So you did an additional form of cooking. This one never happened before. So if this one is a different form and it never happened before, so you're over now. Hilchos Bishul, it's called Bishul. That would not read into the Gemara of Tam Matzah B'Inon. It has nothing to do with Tam. It's simply because you did an additional malacha. That's not what the Gemara is saying. According to the Taz, the Gemara, anything we say, why, Kom Pesach, Matzah, Shabbos, is also has to lie in the words of Tam Matzah B'Inon. It doesn't. According to this explanation, it can't lie in the words of Tam Matzah B'Inon. The Gemara must be telling us that the definition of what is going to be the criteria to make Hilchos Shabbos Yesh Bishul Achatzli is if I take the taste and I change it from the taste of Tzli to the taste of Bishul, that's considered Yesh Bishul Achatzli. That's the reason, because there's enough a change that we don't look at this thing anymore as Tzli. We look at it as Mevushal. It changed. It's no longer, that means you're telling me Ein Bishul Acha Bishul, because Ein Bishul Acha Bishul says that the first Bishul is here. You can't add additional Bishuls to it, because if it's Mevushal, it's Mevushal. But now the Gemara is saying, but yes, Bishul Acha Tzli, because the Tzli taste is not here anymore. You got rid of it. You got a new taste. A new taste is considered a new Bishul. It's considered a new thing, and therefore, Yesh Bishul Achatzli. Okay, I'm now going to tell you, I'm not going to go through all the reasons again because I would like to cut out a lot of things because it's a very long topic. So let's go over the Beis Meir and the Iglei Tal. They don't understand the whole question of the Afya and the Yereim. They say it's simple in the Gemara and Brachos that it has to be that Yesh Bishul Achatzli. They don't see it should be even dependent in Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi. It has to be Yesh Bishul Achatzli. Why? They say a simple thing. The Gemara asks a question that by Yerek, it should be dependent on the machloikis of Meir and Rabbi Yossi, whether if you cook a Yerek, you make Adom or Shak. So he says, I don't understand. According to Rabbi Meir, you tell me, Ein Bishul Achatzli. According to Rabbi Yossi, Yesh Bishul Achatzli. So according to Rabbi Meir, Ein Bishul Achatzli. And that's the reason why, according to Rabbi Meir, it stays something that's baked. It's not considered cooked. So Frek, the Beis Meir, I don't understand. So what's the Gemara saying that according to Rabbi Meir, if you cook a Yerek, it should stay Adoma? It's not true. If you cook a Yerek, it should still be a Shakal. It should still be Shakal. You know why? Because a Yerek was never cooked. Even according to Rabbi Meir, if you cook something, it changes. There's a problem. If you already cooked, you already baked it, then the Bishul doesn't do anything. But if you cook now a Yerek from the first time, of course, Yesh Bishul does Bishul. So of course, it's considered a new thing. You make Shakal. Who says Rabbi Meir would argue? And because of this question, the Beis Meir says it's partial. No question. Everyone agrees Yesh Bishul Achatzli. The only question is, even if you say Yesh Bishul Achatzli, does it say now that it's no longer Tzli? You ripped out, there's no longer anymore the original Tzli? Or do you say, no, it's still here, but you added an additional bishul. And then Meir says, yes, bishul achat tzli, but the tzli remains, and there's an additional bishul. According to Rabbi Yossi, there's no longer any more the tzli that was there before. And therefore, according to the Meir, the Korban Pesach is no good, the matzah the Korban Pesach is good, and the matzah is still a matzah because you didn't rip out what was there before. You just added an additional bishul. According to Rabbi Yossi, you ripped it out, and therefore it's no longer considered tzli, no longer considered afui, and therefore you are considered. You are no longer have the thing before, and therefore you should make shahakal on the yer. So again, I think it's very clear from the Meir and the Glital that they both understand that the nidon of yesh bishul achat tzli has nothing to do with the fact that you got rid of the taste of the tzli, or you became no longer tzli. It's an independent question. Can a person be over bishul once something is baked, roasted and baked, or not? And the question is, like we said before, is the fact that it's not raw material and it's already went through a process of using heat to enhance it, can you now have an additional form of heat, a different one, and that's considered a bishul? Or is bishul something that needs a raw material? Otherwise, it's not considered bishul. According to the Beis Meir and according to the Glital, in this point, they say, Kule alma moedim, that of course you can have bishul achat tzli. It's a different form of using heat, and therefore it's considered a bishul. And therefore, in Hilchos Shabbos, it's pashut that you should be over. The question that they have is, and that's the machloikas of Meir and Rabbi Yossi, is whether you are ripping out the original tzli. Are you getting rid of the original tzli? Are you getting rid of the original afia? Or you're not getting rid of it? So now, according to their understanding, they have problems how to understand the Rav Yah and this, and they go, the Beis Meir, like Shved, the Glital goes on to say many things. I'm not going to go into all of them. I just want to bring out the noise. The question again is the idea of yesh bishul achat tzli dependent on ripping out what was there before, because it has to do with taste. If something was mevushal slowly before, and now you made it into something that's mevushal, you enhanced, you made a whole different taste. So we don't look at it as tzli, we look at it as bishul, and therefore yesh bishul achat tzli. Or yesh bishul achat tzli is not dependent on that. Yesh bishul achat tzli is a new question, whether can one item be enhanced in two ways, and they're both considered bishul and tzli, or once it's not a raw material and it's already either roasted or baked, you can't have any more something that's called bishul. Bishul means taking raw material and cooking. I want to point out that this has two major nafkaminas. And I'm going to explain to you briefly what they are, and then we're going to go into the halacha l'maaseh. One is, I want to ask a question, what about the opposite way? Yesh tzli achar bishul. Is there roasting after cooking? So I'm assuming everyone will quickly say, yeah, of course. What's the difference? So the Yereim says that yes. I'll agree. The Smag also says that yes. But it's clear that not everybody, not all Rishonim hold that according to the Yereim, there is tzli achar bishul. And it would seem that the Gemara makes a difference between bishul achat tzli and tzli achar bishul. Because the Gemara we saw in Pesachim says very clearly that if somebody does bishul and then does tzli, the Gemara says it's pashut that you're chayiv. It's not a machloikas or Meir and Rabbi Yossi. Everyone says you're chayiv on Korban Pesach if you cooked it and then you roasted and you ate it. Why? Why is it so simple? Why don't we say that according to Rabbi Yossi, the tzli that he did afterwards should make it good, just like the bishul afterwards ruins it. So why don't we say that tzli afterwards fixes it? It would seem that tzli does not remove the Bishul from it. That was simple to the Gemara. So now you have one or two options. You can either say that it's true, you're right. Tzli doesn't take away the Bishul, but in Hilchos Shabbos doesn't make a difference, because the point is that you can use two different forms of heat to prepare something. And Anachanami, the Bishul stays, and now the Tzli does a different enhancement. And this enhancement of Tzli is its malacha for self. Like the base Meir and the Eglei Tal. Has nothing to do with the fact that you're getting rid of the time of before. But according to the Taz, one can then make the claim and say, no, you need to, in order for you one to make a Bishul Achat Tzli, the only reason is because you got rid of the Tzli. But since Tzli can't get rid of Bishul, so therefore, maybe you shouldn't be over. And the honest truth is that the Sefer Mitzvahs HaKotan, Smak, in the Hagoy's Smak says it pretty clearly, in the Kol Boy says it pretty clearly, that there's no Tzli Achat Bishul because you can't, and he brings a raya on this Gemara. They seem to understand that the only reason it should be is if you could get rid of the other thing, and here you can't. So this is the Tur, the Mechaber are pretty clear that they held that there's no Tzli Achat Bishul. Even though la halacha l'maaseh we're machmed that there's yesh Tzli Achat Bishul. But it's definitely many who held that there's no Tzli Achat Bishul, even though there's Bishul Achat Tzli. And the only way to understand it is this way: whether the Tzli Achat Bishul cannot uproot the Bishul, and that's a Tanai in order to have yesh Bishul, yesh Bishul Achat Tzli or Tzli Achat Bishul, has to uproot it, and it can. That is the one nafkamina that could be from this discussion. Another nafkamina that could be is, I have the following question. Someone did Bishul, then he did Tzli, and now he wants to do Bishul again. I would like to know if he does the Bishul again, now, whether he's going to be Oiva or not. So, I think it's a good question. What's the question? I think it should depend on these two things. But I have to switch the story around a little. Let's do Tzli, Bishul, and now you're going to do Tzli again. Okay? So now, we said that according to the Taz and according to the Smak, Bishul Achat Tzli, the reason is it rips out the Tzli. So now we have a Bishul and we don't have the Tzli anymore. So now if you go and you do now a Tzli, you could be over again. Now, it would depend, because if you do the Tzli again and there's no Tzli Achat Bishul, it won't work. But if you hold somehow that even without ripping it out, you could still have Tzli Achat Bishul, that means you hold of both of the reasons, then you could be Tzli Achat Bishul. Yeah. We're going to talk about the case that I'm asked about a chong that's fully cooked. We'll talk about it in a few moments. So one more. But if you hold that Tzli Achat Bishul, if someone holds that the reason why Bishul Achat Tzli has nothing to do with the fact that it uproots the old one, it's just simply adding. You can only add once. You had Bishul, then you had Tzli, you add another time, you get another Bishul or another Tzli. It's just repeating the same preparation. So you're definitely going to have a lot of Ein Tzli Achat Tzli or Ein Bishul Achat Bishul. But if you uproot it, then there's a possibility for one to be over again. We're going to see, Allah Alamaisa, if we get there, we have enough time, that this is a machloikis, whether the Allah is that you can have Bishul, Achat Tzli, Achat Bishul, whether you can have 3 steps and it still be awesome. And it's also negay Allah Alamaisa for coffee. And hopefully we'll get there in a few moments. So I'm going to go now to discussing a little halacha l'maaseh, and let's see how much we can accomplish. So again, we have a machloikis, even though ein bishul acha bishul, we have a machloikis about bishul acha tzli. I have to say the one akdama before we discuss all these halachas. Before anyone wants to use a heter in the halacha of bishul acha tzli or tzli acha bishul, you have to first know that you're in compliance with the halachas of ein bishul acha bishul. That means first you have to know that it's ein bishul acha bishul. Now the question is tzli acha bishul or bishul acha tzli or bishul acha afia or afia acha bishul, is it worse or is it the same as bishul acha bishul? But if you're not in compliance with the halachas of bishul acha bishul, you're in trouble. Now for the halachas of bishul acha bishul, there's one very important halacha. There's a difference between a yavish and a davar lach. If you have a davar yavish, then the halacha is ein bishul acha bishul. You have a davar lach, the davar lach is already nitztanen. It got so cold that it's no longer edible to eat it as a cold thing, as a warm thing. It's not considered anymore eating a warm thing. And at that point, it's not considered. Then we hold yesh bishul acha bishul, the davar lach shenitztanen. So again, before one deals with our subjects, you have to know you're in compliance with the halachas of bishul acha bishul. The second akdama I have to make is that even if you're going to have cases where there's not going to be a problem of bishul acha tzli or tzli acha bishul or bishul acha bishul, it's all midoraisa in the halachas of cooking, but you have to be in compliance with the halachas of chazorah. That means even in cases where there's no bishul, there's a halacha you're not allowed to put anything onto the fire on Shabbos in the first place. You cannot put food onto a fire on Shabbos. Whether there is bishul or there's not, one is not allowed to put food onto Shabbos onto a fire. There's a gzeira d'Rabbanan either because we're afraid you're gonna heat up, you're gonna be mechata b'gecholim, you're gonna turn over the gecholim in order to enhance the fire so that it can heat up better, or because it looks like you're being mevashel lechatchila and Chazal made a gzeira, you shouldn't do it. So you cannot put anything onto the flame on Shabbos midrabanan either way. So it's not negay the shaila of bishul acha tzli acha bishul. It's only negay the shaila when you want to either return something that was already on the fire on Shabbos and return it on Shabbos. So even though you're allowed to return it because you have the rules of Chazara, which are 3 rules, bekitzer. One is that it has to be that the fire is going to be goru v'kotum. That means you have a blech. It has to be that the item that you took off stayed in your hand, or whatever is considered staying in your hand. And number 3, it has to be so long that the item didn't cool down. So all these rules have to be for Hilchos Chazorah. So if you're allowed to put it back, midrabanan, because of Hilchos Chazorah, you still now have to ask yourself, is there bishul here or there's no bishul? Because if it's not fully cooked, or if you have a problem of tzli acha bishul, bishul acha tzli, you're going to have a problem. There are other hechetimtzes that one, it will be negay the question of yesh bishul acha tzli or tzli acha bishul, and that is 4 hechetimtzes. I'm going to say them quickly. I hope you can follow them. Number 1, the halacha is that one is allowed to put lechatchila, something that's already cooked on top of a pot that's full of food. That's called a kedeira malaya. One's allowed to put food on top of that because their Chazal didn't make this gzeira. Since it's not directly on the fire, it's on a pot, but it needs to be a pot that's full, a pot that's empty. The pashtus most place can hold is not different than a blech. You cannot put food on a blech lechatchila on Shabbos. You only put it on a pot full of food. Not into the pot, on top of the pot. Into the pot is back onto the fire. Number 2, you can put it next to the fire, as long as it's not that mamish next to the fire, a little bit further from the fire. One's also allowed to put food over there to warm up. Number 3, one can put food into a kli rishon or into a kli sheni. That means if it's no longer on the fire, but it's a hot pot that came off the fire, and it's still roasting hot, and halach is kli rishon is mevashel. There's no gzeira d'Rabbanan. As long as the food is cooked, you can put it in. Now it'll be negay the question of yesh bishul acha afia and bishul acha. And the fourth Eichatimtza is, it's Negea ba'amira la'akom b'mokum tzorich gadol, or b'mokum oinik Shabbos. The halacha is that chazara, or putting food onto the fire, which is a issa derabanan, with a guy, is a shvus de shvus, is a derabanan on a issa derabanan. The halacha is that b'mokum tzorich gadol, or b'mokum oinik Shabbos, that a person does not have food, warm food for Shabbos. The halacha is that one is allowed to ask a guy to do a derabanan. But if it's a problem of Bishul, then you're not going to be able to ask a guy. So that's why it's negay the question of yesh Bishul achafia, ain't Bishul achafia. So let's try to remember the 5 times it's negay. If you have chazara, means you're returning something and you have all tanoia chazara, you're putting it on top of a kedera mileya, you're putting it on a full pot. You're putting it next to the fire, not onto the fire. You're putting it into a kli rishon, onto a kli sheni, or you're having a guy do it b'makam mitzvah or oinik Shabbos. And now let's begin the halachas of Hilchos Bishul achatzli. So we said that there's a machloikos rishonim if yesh Bishul achatzli. The Aram says there is, the Rav Yos says there's not. The Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah is a long arichos, but bekitzer, the Shulchan Aruch brings 2 days. The Ramah understands there's 3 opinions. Opinion number 1 is it's usher even beklisheni. One is not allowed to cook a thing that was baked, even in a klisheni. Another day the Ramah brings yeshoimrim, you can put it into a klisheni. And the 3rd day is the shita of the Rav Yah, that you're allowed to even put it into a kli rishon. There are more paskins that the minig is that we are machme, even in a klisheni, not to put in something that is baked or roasted into even a klisheni. Yesh bishul afia afilu beklisheni. But the achronim are medayik that that's a minig and a chumrah. But me'ikar adin, it's mutter. What's mutter me'ikadin? The Rav Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Berurah and Emon, that me'ikadin we hold you even allowed to put in a kli. That means we paskin like the Rav Yah, me'ikar halacha. That ain't afia, bishul achar afia. But the minig is to be machmir on bishul be'mokem afia. Now, since it's only a chumrah, so really we hold it's mutter. It's negei la'amiru la'akum, because by amiru la'akum we don't have to be machmeh on a chumrah. We could go with the ikar adin. So if we're going to have a case that we're going to want to do a chazorah and it's going to be mutal tzorich gadol and ba'oinik Shabbos, you're going to be allowed to put something onto the fire. If the only problem is going to be yesh bishul achar afia, since me'ikar adin we hold it's mutter, it will not be considered amiru la'akum for doing a meleches is the Torah, and therefore one would be allowed to be mekel. So now, this is true that the minig is that we're machmeh even on a klisheni. What about a kli shlishi? So the Mishnah Berurah says that in a kli shlishi one could be mekel. So if you want to do a kli shlishi, so long as the klishishi is not roasting hot, that's yad nichvis. If it's yad nichvis, that means if you would stick your hand in, you would burn your hands immediately. One should be machme even in a klishlishi. But otherwise, one could be mekel in a klishlishi to put in something that was already cooked, baked, and even though it's going to get cooked. A irui of a klisheni, that means you're going to pour a hot liquid out of a klisheni onto something that's already baked, and now you're going to pour it, yesh bishul achar afia, from an irui klisheni. So the halacha is, the Mishnah Berurah sounds like he would be machma on this, but if you pour it in a way that nifsek hakiluach, that means you just give a little pour and it gets detached from the place you're pouring it, one could be mekel, and b'makom tzorich, one could be mekel even to do iri klisheni, regular iri klisheni. I'm saying a few akdamis, and then we're going to talk about a bunch of cases, halacha l'maisa. One more akdama, the Mishnah Berurah paskins that if one takes a ladle to take soup out of a pot and put it into a bowl, the Mishnah Berurah says that legabe the halacha of yesh bishul achar afia, one can assume that it's deemed a kli shlishi. It means a ladle, whether it's considered a kli sheni and therefore making the soup bowl a kli shlishi is a machloikis. But legabe this halacha, since really me'ikadin we hold that ein bishul achar afia, when it comes to this shaila, one can assume that what's in your bowl is now considered a kli shlishi. So let's begin with some practical things. One who has bread croutons, or he wants to put challah into his soup. So the halacha would be that if they poured directly from the pot into his bowl, then his bowl would be a kli sheni. The pot, when it's removed from the fire, is a kli rishon. Pouring into the bowl would be a kli sheni. And the halacha is yesh bishul achar afia mitzad aminig, even in a kli sheni. So one should not put challah or bread croutons into this bowl because he would be in violation of this halacha. Same thing, so the people that eat gebrokts Pesach, or they eat achron shel Pesach, and it comes out on Shabbos. So if one's going to put matzah, it's a very big Indian to put matzah, make sure you have more gebrokts possible. So you're putting in matzah into your soup bowl. Again, if the soup bowl is poured directly from the pot, that bowl will be considered a klisheni. One should not do that. But once they removed the soup through using a ladle into your bowl, then you would have this kula of the Mishnah Berurah, and one would be allowed to put bread or bread croutons into this pot, into this bowl, because it would already be considered a kli shlishi. This halacha, as well as negeh, sometimes people heat up, they leave on the flame before some kind of syrup or a good sweet tasting syrup or something to pour onto a cookie or onto a cake. They want it to be warm, and they pour this onto a cake or a cookie. That would be a irui kli rishon of a dava that's a roitiv, or some kind of liquid, onto a baked item. That would be asa, because yesh bishul achar afia, and irui kli rishon would be mevashel, at least kedei klipa, and therefore you would be yesh bishul achar afia, and one should not do that. One cannot pour on a baked item something from kli rishon. But once he pours it into a second keli, and from there he wants to pour it on, that would be irui kli sheni. Again, if you could do it benifsek hakiluach, by chopping, just pouring it like quickly, slowly, and chopping it off, be better. If not, there's yesh al milismut. Most powders, spices, are considered, even if they were before treated with heat, they're only baked. They are not cooked. And therefore, at maximum, they're ofui, they're tzli. They're not considered cooked. And therefore, one is not allowed to put them into a klisheni, because that would be yesh bishul achar afia. Therefore, spices that are cooked, that are baked or roasted, or if you have hot cocoa, or you have soup mix, even if all the items in there are cooked, which they're not, or are whatever, baked or this, which they're not always, but even if they are, they're usually not cooked. And therefore, yesh bishul achar afia. And even in a klisheni, splendor for the us older Yidden that are no longer eating sugar and watching our weight, we eat Splenda. Splenda is roasted, but it's not cooked, and therefore one's not allowed to put Splenda into a cup of hot water they took out of the urn. It's now a kli sheni. One's not allowed to do that. Yesh bishul achar afia. Once you took, we're going to talk about coffee if they let me still stay on the shia. I'm already late.
Please. We need to know this.
So we're gonna get to coffee in a few minutes. But if one has already got the liquid through into a kli shlishi, or he already has the liquid using a ladle in a bowl of hot water, that will be a kli shlishi. If he knows for sure that everything has already been baked at least, then the halacha would be that it would be mutter. Sometimes on Friday night, we're eating chicken, kugel, some potato kugel, and we realize as we're taking out the chicken and the kugel from the pot that we holding in our hands, and we're dishing it out, we have extras. So we might as well enjoy it with the cholent tomorrow. So some people take the leftover kugel and they put it into the cholent, or they take the leftover chicken and they stick it into the cholent. Now, we're talking obviously where the person has the het of chazara. That means he did it. He's still holding it biyodoi, and it's garu v'kotim. He makes sure that the crock pot has a blech, and he does it miyad, but he still has a problem of yesh bishul achar afia, because kugel is baked, it's not cooked. We'll talk about that in a few minutes a little more. Chicken is baked, it's not cooked. Most chicken, less people make chicken in the soup, but otherwise the chicken is baked. Putting that into the cholent would now be bishul achar afia or achatzli, and we do not do bishul achar afia or achatzli, and therefore one should not do that. Any kugel or chicken he wants in the cholent should be put in before Shabbos. On Shabbos, he shouldn't be doing that.
An individual plate, you could do it because of being samech on the kli shlishi because of the ladle. Is that accurate?
Again,
you can put anything you wish your individual plate, assuming the tongue comes out with a ladle.
Once you have a plate with a ladle, you can put in kugel even into a cholent. Even if you dip it into the cholent, it would be agam. A cholent is a dova gush, and some poskim would say that that's considered like it's still a kli rishon. So to go dump your kugel or your chicken mamish in that was not there and put it mamish deep inside your cholent, I would say you shouldn't do that. But if it's just touching it on the side, then I would say that that's okay.
If it's in a kli, is there any difference? Some people take kugel and wrap it in silver foil.
If you wrap it in silver foil and you would put it into the cholent, you would have a new problem. It would be atmana, and that would be its own isser of doing it on Shabbos. You definitely don't want it to mix with the chicken, then you would have a problem of atmana. If you want it to mix with the chicken, it would be a problem of bishul achar. Now, if one makes a item that's a belila raka, that means you make it, it's a poured ingredients, but it solidifies and bakes in the oven, like you make a cake with a batter, or you make, like I said, a kugel with a batter. That's considered something that's baked. It's not considered something that's cooked. Cooking means that you take an item and you put it in another liquid, but just a batter that solidifies, that's considered baked and not considered cooked. And therefore, if you're going to take one of those items and you're going to deal with them, you're going to put, like if you have, like I said, you have a cookie and you're drinking a hot glass of tea, and your glass of tea is only a klisheni, and you put into there a cookie, you're dipping it in, like the Alte Yidden used to take up his little cake and cookie and stick it in, or you're putting it into your coffee, which is a klisheni, and you're dipping in cake and cookie, you have a problem from yesh, Bishul, afia, and a klisheni that you shouldn't be doing. So therefore, you have to be careful and make sure that you turn it into kli shlishi if you want to do that. Now, if something stews in its own liquid, that means when you make food, some food has its own fat and its own liquids, and therefore you just bake it in the oven using its own liquids. The Orchos Shabbos says that the Chazon Ish holds that that's considered mevushal. I don't believe that that's what the Chazon Ish says. I believe that the Chazon Ish is not talking about this case. And I think the Pri Megadim is pretty clear that it is considered something that's tzli. And definitely I would think one should be makpid to deal with it as if it was something that was only roasted, and therefore it's a problem. It says in Shulchan Aruch in Siman, in Hilchos Brachos, that if one takes a bread and he fries it in a even in a shallow amount of oil, where it's not floating around deep fried, but it's just a shallow amount of oil, it's mashma in the Shulchan Aruch that that's considered mevushal, not considered tzli or afway. It's considered mevushal. Therefore, it says in Shulchan Aruch there, you don't make a hamoitzi. It's not considered lechem. If you fry it, a piece of dough, in a shallow amount of oil, it's not considered a hamoitzi. The Mishnah Brura, though, brings from a Magavron that's choishish that it is considered an hamoitzi, and therefore it is considered ofay. And there's a bisharatzi there that goes back and forth, and Machloikis brings all kinds of sugyas. And the Mishnah Brura sounds like he's machmir over there to deal with it as if it was considered something that's only baked and not considered cooked. The Aruch HaShulchan, just for our pashtus at the end of Siman Shin Yud Ches, says that something that's fried, tigun, is considered tzli. It's not considered cooked. He doesn't tell us how he deals with the halachas in Hilchos Brachos, but some points can want to say maybe that Hilchos Brachos and Hilchos Shabbos are not dependent to one another, and in Hilchos Shabbos, fried, it's still considered only baked. So again, I think l'chatchila, one should be makbid, at least in a kli rishon, that something that's fried in oil should be deemed as it was only baked and not cooked. So therefore, someone makes schnitzel or kremzle of your or latkes or these kind of things that are just fried in a shallow amount of oil, one should deal with it as if it was baked ligabi a kli rishon. So therefore, to pour from a kli rishon hot liquid onto them, one should not do, because we would have to deal with them as if it were a thing that's only mevushal. The yesh acha, the yesh bishul acha tzli, at least be'iri kli rishon or kli rishon, and therefore one should be makpid on that. Blintzes are something that kule alma moedim is considered only tzli. It's not considered cooked because you only put oil that shouldn't stick to the pan, and that's halacha mufresh that that's not considered cooked. Kule alma, if someone wants to put hot syrup onto a blintz, or he has a blintz that he wraps some kind of potatoes in, and it's nice and warm on Shabbos, and then they give us a gravy straight from a kli rishon, you shouldn't pour from a kli rishon. From an iri kli sheni, again, from a kli sheni, we're machma, iri kli sheni, again, maybe it's more like a if you can avoid it, and pour it into. The gay also, the lokshin of Pesach. Pesach, the lokshin, is also like blintzes, it's all fried, it's with only not considered fried, it's just a
chances of successful legal challenges in Michigan.
So the halacha would be that those are also b'kli sheni. So if you have soup on Pesach and you want to put in lokshin, you have a problem with that because of yesh b'shlach hatzliya. A question was asked if one can put kugel on top of a k'deira Malay of oichel Why is not a problem of atmana if it's wrapped in silver foil? The answer is one wrapping is not considered atmana. It's considered cooking in a keli, which is okay. But once it's in another pot, it's a problem. It's really doesn't belong to this sugya, but a side point. Now, if it's deep fried, most poskim say that something that's deep fried is considered mevushal. So, egg rolls, French fries, falafel balls, or soup mandlin, these little croutons that you buy that are deep fried. They're not the bread croutons, but these other small, yellow croutons. These are deep fried. Most poskim hold they're mevushal, and therefore one's allowed to put them even into a klisheni because ein bishul achar bishul.
Why, if they're deep fried?
What?
Why are they mevushal if they're deep fried?
Deep fry is because it's no difference if you cook something in hot water or in hot oil. If it's a thin layer, it's not cooked in oil. It's just that the oil is protecting, is adding some kind of thing, but you're still directly attached to the fire. That's why it may be afui or tzli. But once you have a deep level of oil, the fire is not directly in any way impacting the food. It's only being impacted by the liquid, and that's considered mevushal and not considered afui. If you make donuts, so if you make donuts like in Eretz Yisrael, sufganiyot, the real old punchkis that they used to deep fry, so those are a problem. Those are considered mevushal. You have a regular donut. Now you can buy different donuts. They have now even you can buy donuts. The regular donuts are afui, and the deep fried donuts, those are the real dangerous ones. Those that you eat one day and it burns 8. So those you have a din, it has a din of mevushal. So if you want to take the second donut and put it in tati, you're okay. If you take the donut that's just baked, you put it in tati, you have a problem if the tea is a cliche. Okay, I'm going to just touch 2 more, 3 things, and then we'll close the shir. Yes, the question is whether yes sliach habishul. So we said that really there's many who hold that even if you hold yesh bishul achatzli, there may not be sliach habishul. Lamaisa, the Mishnah Brura, the Rav Shulchan, the Magavrom, they're all machme, and they say there is sli achar bishul. The problem is, if this is true, so then technically something that was cooked, you cannot warm up on Shabbos, even if it's dry, and you want to put it onto another pot, and you want it just to warm up, like you have lakshan, you want to put it into the soup, but it's cold, it's going to make the soup cold. So you want to take the lakshan, it's in a silver foil, you want to put it on top of the cholent pot, top of the crock pot, or on top of the soup pot, and you want it to sit there and warm up. So l'chayr, you're going to have a problem of yesh tzli acha bishul, because these lakshans were only bishul, and now it's going to get tzli, and yesh tzli acha bishul. L'maisa, the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Tziftes Vov seems to say it's mutter. The Bir Aloch over there asks the question why he brings it. The Beis Meir asks it. The Beis Meir bleibt sorchian. He brings the Maimon Motche, says all kinds of doichkim, and the Mishnah Brura really doesn't answer. But the Chazon Ish says that even if you hold yesh tzli acha bishul, it needs to be that the tzli makes a major impact. Just warming it up, and it doesn't, and he's mitzadeh that it has to be directly on fire, has to be roasted directly, even if there's a pot in the middle, is already not considered tzli acha bishul. And the minhag olam is lahakol b'zeh. So therefore, in order to have tzli acha bishul, one would need mamish to put it in a situation where it's on top of on a barbecue. So if you want to take a marshmallow and put it onto the barbecue, even if the marshmallow you're going to tell me is already cooked, and you're just making it a little bit roasted on top of the barbecue, and the barbecue doesn't have a problem of Hilchos Shabbos, it's gar of a cotton, you already got rid of you come out, knocked out all the flames, you put all kinds of sand on it, so it should quiet down the gecholim. So there's no problem of Gor V'Kotum, and it's going to have a problem in Asin L'Chatchila. You get rid of all the problems, you're still going to have the issue of Yesh Sli Acha Bishul. Now, if a person has chont, and it's chont, he took it Friday night, and he took out chont, he's going to put it back, and he's planning to leave the chont, but he likes the chont until it's completely dry. He wants it to be mamish, like thick, and completely dry. The halacha is that l'choyru should be a problem of tzli achar bishul, because now there's no more liquid, and it's going to become just tzolui. So again, here you would have this kula of the Chazon Ish as well, since it's in a pot, and it's not directly onto the fire, and it just dries out a bit. It doesn't really become a roasted chont. So that, again, there's a mokum to be mekel, and to say that there's no problem of tzliach habishul, especially since, like we already said, many akronim hold there is no issa of tzliach habishul. And now let me just deal with one more question, and with this we'll close the shir. A person wants to take a lokshin kugel and pour onto the lokshin kugel some kind of gravy. Is he allowed to do that? Question number 2. A person wants to put instant coffee into a kli sheni. Is he allowed to do that? So why are these two questions the same? The answer is, let's study the process of both of these items. The kugel, you first cook all the lokshin in a pot, so it's mevushal. Then you went and you bake it in an oven. Now it becomes afui. And then you go and you want to pour gravy, so now you're going to be mevashal it again. So you first did bishul, then you did afia, then you did bishul. Or you have coffee. Coffee, what they do is they first cook the coffee bean. The liquid comes out. They dry it. They're left with just the tam, the taste, the thing. They then roast it, so to give it a roasted taste. So now you had mevushal, then you had soloi. Now you want to put it into a cup of water, it's going to be mevashal once more. The Pri Megadim says that if you do bishul, afia, and then bishul again, since the Gemara is mevuah that if you did afia after bishul, the first bishul never was gotten rid of. Therefore, the Pri Megadim says there's no problem to be mavashal it again, because you have already bishul and you have already afia, and doing another bishul would be under the rule of ein bishul acha bishul. And therefore, the Pri Megadim holds its mutter. The Bir Halacha is not happy with the Pri Megadim. I don't understand 100% the Bir Halacha's svara, but he says that since the last thing you did was the opposite thing, you first did a bishul, then you did afia, so even if it doesn't get rid of the first bishul, since you did now an afia, the second bishul will accomplish something, and therefore, yesh bishul acha afia, and he's choishish that would be a problem. And if that's true, then a coffee and a kli sheni would be a problem. You should only be doing a coffee and a kli shlishi, and some achronim say that to be choishish for this bir halacha, but the ikar halacha I think is like the Pri Megadim. It says in Chesha ve'efo from Padova also says he agrees with the Pri Megadim, and one who wants to be mekel, and since the kli sheni is only a chumra b'chlal of yesh afia chabishul, the kli sheni is a chumra, so to a kli sheni, and in Shrav Shlomo Zalman as well as mekel a coffee. And a kli sheni says different svara. So to make a coffee and a kli sheni, if one wants to be mekel, one has who to be soymechan. I just want to end with a very interesting thing we see in this week's Pasha, that they brought Shnei Gedoya Izim, Rivka brought to Yitzchak, Shnei for through Yankee, through Shnei, Rashi says, one for Korban Pesach and one for Matamim. I was wondering why they couldn't make the Matamim out of the Korban Pesach. But I saw in the Targum that it teaches the word Matamim means tafshilin. So I guess it needs to be cooked. And there's a problem of Bishul Achatzli would ruin the Korban Pesach. So you needed to have two Gedoya Izim, one to be tzli and one to be cooked. And then you would have no problem of Yesh Bishul Achatzli. Be matzliach and Hatzlocha v'chol tov.
Questions for the Ilam had one question here before the Rav goes. Is it usher using aluminum wrap of kugel and placing on a pan on a blech? Is that
If
atman?
you atmana,
Because the Rav said putting something into the pot with aluminum is atman.
again, you're talking about an empty pan.
A pan and a blech, yeah, empty pan. You have cold kugel. How do you get it heated up?
You have cold kugel. So you can't, if you have kugel, you can't put it onto a blech, into a pan, because that's chazorah. You can't do that. It has to be a pot that's full of food. If it's empty, you can't put it. If it was already there, you could do it. But if you want to now put it, you could put it onto a cholent pot. Let's talk about the crock pot. You could put it onto the crock pot. If you put it onto the crock pot, you ladder wrap it in a silver foil because it's not in another keli. This is the only keli that's holding it. That's not atmana. That's called protecting the food in a pot.